We did a smart thing with 5th edition by listening to the fans. And what came out of that process was a system that is stable.
When researching this video, I decided to look at the different versions of D&D Next, which was the playtest for what eventually became Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, in order to look at how and why they arrived at their action system of 1 action and 1 bonus action. And I was surprised to see that the last D&D Next playtest, released September 19, 2013, does not have a bonus action system. So despite the impression being given to us today, this core part of the system did not get properly playtested. This is the follow-up to my last Lawyer's Critique video on One D&D, and this is where I take on this spicy topic of whether D&D should take up the 3-action system of Pathfinder 2nd edition, often called the 3-action economy, which has gotten a lot of praise from players. And I initially didn't plan to make this video in my series of videos on One D&D for 2 reasons. One, I knew it would make me a lightning rod for the accusation that since I'm primarily a Pathfinder 2e creator, that I simply wanted D&D to be a clone of Pathfinder 2nd edition, which I don't. And also that it was not likely that Wizards of the Coast would do anything of the kind, given that they want to foster the idea that the new edition, which I call 6th edition, is going to be compatible with previous adventures and supplements. And changing the action economy to a 3-action economy would be seen rightly as too radical for that to be true, that this would break compatibility. But the most recent Unearthed Arcana article on expert classes convinced me that the design team is going after design goals that are chafing against the limits of the current action system. The new UA has defined actions for studying an enemy for its abilities and weaknesses, for searching, such as for an invisible enemy, or jumping. And you cannot, because they are actions, do them at the same time in the same turn where you attack with your weapon or cast most spells. So there are ways to make them into bonus actions, such as by taking a feat or being the thief subclass, but it begs the question, why not both? Why not make this the default option for all characters? I think this UA is trying to do 3 things, which are codifying some rules that were vague before, giving characters more things to do on their turn besides I attack, and also defining more ways you can make your skills useful in combat. But each of these actions require your action. Meanwhile, in Pathfinder 2e's 3-action system, you can do these things while attacking, because attacking is just one of your 3 actions. But is that a good idea for Dungeons & Dragons? My TLDR is I don't think so, but I offer an alternative which takes inspiration from D&D 4e, which should be interesting to look at. I should introduce myself before going further. I am Ronald, the rules lawyer. I am a lawyer who has 12 years experience game mastering, mostly Pathfinder 1st edition, but also D&D 5th edition eventually, and Pathfinder 2nd edition. And I have years of experience teaching an after-school program to middle schoolers, which helps me organize and present information. And in the series, my overall take is that 6th edition should serve a market of people that exists out there that want some long-standing problems in 5th edition to be addressed, which could be addressed well by looking at the example of what Pathfinder 2nd edition does in some respects, but that those people also don't want the same level of granularity and complexity that exists in Pathfinder 2nd edition. In the video, I will go over the history of action systems in Dungeons & Dragons and the design goals that those served, look at Pathfinder 2nd edition's 3-action system within that history, and finally look at whether that makes sense for Dungeons & Dragons 6th edition. I'll go over the history of how we arrived to where we are because it's important to do that before tinkering with Dungeons & Dragons action system. We need to know what the design goals historically the system has faced and problems that it has tried to solve before, and why therefore we currently have the current system before we try to discard or modify any part of it. And I also go into Pathfinder because it's an evolutionary branch of the same game. There is a caveat, though, in that nothing I'm about to say is confirmed in any book or piece of writing. I'm not aware of an article or book anywhere that goes over the history of action systems in D&D. It's basically the result of my looking at the rule systems themselves. I have all the books from all the main editions, numbered editions, and gleaning what the thoughts of the designers were, just as I, in my most recent One D&D video, tried to glean the design intentions of the designers of the next D&D edition, because they're not being stated openly by the designers, which was rightly criticized in an open letter, which I heartily endorsed by Treant Monk, and I'm going to put a link in the video description. So I don't have direct evidence that these were the design goals. However, I think my analysis will be borne out by the facts. Also, I won't go into full detail into each edition. Feel free to supplement in the comments things I miss. My concern is not to do a full summary of each edition, but to follow the main trends. Now, the first design goal that I will notice in the original D&D was to keep play simple by having characters have only one action per turn. And I say design goal in quotes because it wasn't so much a plan as it's just where the hobby started. It started in war games in which players controlled military units consisting of nameless individuals, not many of them having rich backstories and personalities. And in those war games, you had basically one thing you could do, and then it was your opponent's turn to do their one action in this game. So in original D&D, then through first and second editions of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, we see this rule where you can only make one attack with your weapons, or cast one spell, or use one magic item. You could do some other things, obviously movement or pulling out a weapon, but those were all not really well defined. It was up to the dungeon master to say what you eventually could do in total. But there was a definite limit on how many times you could attack or cast spells. Then with 3rd edition D&D, we see the formalization of everything you could do into action types, the categorizing that modern D&D players are familiar with today. So attacking or casting a spell would be what eventually be called a standard action. It wasn't called that originally in 3.0. Moving used your move equivalent action in 3.0. They decided that other things would compete with that movement. They reduced the time of a round from 1 minute to 6 seconds, and they decided that other things you could do, like readying a weapon or opening a door, would compete with your move equivalent action. Also, you had the option of effectively using your standard action to do a second move equivalent action. So you could move twice on your turn or move and open the door. The design goals are pretty clear to me here. One, they wanted to have clarity and resolve arguments between DMs and players, and also have a standardized game between different DMs. You knew what to expect when you brought your character to another table. The other goal was to maintain the same limitation of one main action per turn. You could only attack with your weapons once or cast a spell once. So they created this hierarchy between standard actions and move equivalent actions. Another decision made here is that if you had the ability to make more than one attack on your turn, doing so would cost you your move equivalent action. The most you could do was move 5 feet on that turn. This was an example of what was eventually called a full round action. It seems to me that the design goal here was to give you an interesting decision to make. You had the option of making more attacks at the cost of your movement, or to make more attacks. However, it created another problem where it incentivized standing in place and using all of your attacks. And that combined with disengaging, provoking an attack of opportunity, did make a lot of combats stationary and not dynamic. Then in 3.5, we see the birth of swift actions. This is for a number of spells that the designers thought Characters who attacked with their weapon should be able to cast to enhance their attacks. These are for extra damage or for extra accuracy on that one main action. You also see some spells here that buff the character for the combat, which are what I call setup actions, that would feel bad if you had to cast that with your main action and then do your attacks the next turn. We also see that quickened spells, which are the ability of higher level spellcasters to cast a second spell on their turn that is much lower level, is formalized as a swift action. So what is the design goal with swift actions? Well, it looks like they wanted to have a controlled space where you can still do your main action, but be able to enhance it with something else. In the case of swift action spells, you cannot pile on more than one of them. It needs its own type. And also, they did not want it to interfere with that character to be able to still move around or use their move equivalent action to open a door, for example. They wanted it to be a third action that they can use to enhance what they normally do. In Pathfinder First Edition, which was essentially D&D 3.75, we see this with paladins using Smite Evil with their swift action, or monks spending a key point with a swift action to get an extra unarmed attack on their turn. However, as you can see from this chart, it created a new problem. This was a lot to learn. It created a barrier to entry. There was also additional interactions that had to be learned. Some of the things on this table provoke an attack of opportunity, while others don't. Next, we have D&D 4th Edition, which tried to unify all of the action types into a single 3-tier hierarchy. Now, everything was either a standard action, a move action, or a minor action. You could exchange these for each other as long as you were trading for something that took less effort. So you could trade your standard action for doing a second minor action, for example. You could even do 3 minor actions. What we saw generally with the 4th edition is that characters seem to be able to do more on their turn. A lot of things that were move actions earlier became cheapened into minor actions. Minor actions were an evolution of the swift actions from earlier, but joining them were a number of what once were move actions now being cheapened into minor actions, things like taking out your weapon, for example. Move actions became the exclusive domain of moving your character around the battlefield or standing up. Interestingly, drinking a potion became a minor action, so you could use 2 minor actions to retrieve a potion from your pack and drink it. Also, many player characters got special abilities that let them do more with a given type of action than normally you could. We see the birth of the fighting healer here, where support classes that normally in previous editions had to choose between fighting and dealing damage to the enemy and healing their allies now could do both. They could attack with their standard action and heal somebody with their minor action. We also see that minor actions also became the action type of choice to sustain an effect, like a spell. So we see several design goals being served here. First, we have the preservation of a single main action, a single main attack or spell that you're casting on your turn, because anything that would resemble that will cost you your most valuable action. We also see the designers wanting characters to be able to just do more on their turn, whereas swift actions before were exclusive to only a small number of characters and a few times. Everyone can do a minor action now and move and attack all in their turn. You can now retrieve a potion and drink it and move on your turn or attack on your turn. Also, the overall design just seemed more intuitive by the different action types being exchangeable with each other and standard actions being described as those that take more time and effort. It was clear that you could exchange and intuitive that you could exchange a greater thing for a lesser. The move actions all involved movement, and the minor actions felt minor. Also, opportunity attacks, which you had to memorize a whole list of triggers for, now only had 3 possible things that could trigger them. Another design goal that was served was that you had more turn variety. You were not doing the same thing every turn because of this exchangeability of action types. And you had more opportunities to exchange X for Y. In my previous example, where you're retrieving and drinking a potion, you must choose whether you're going to move or make an attack on that turn. Maybe you want to move and make an attack on that turn, in which case you can't drink that potion. You could retrieve it now, but you'll have to drink that potion on your next turn. Another example is, let's say there's an orc breathing down your neck and you are a longbowman and you are under attack from some archers in the distance. You want to make that attack, so that's your standard action. You now have the option of moving away or shifting away, which is only moving 5 feet away, but doesn't provoke an attack of opportunity from the orc. But maybe you want to move farther away and provoke that attack of opportunity so that you can get to behind some wall cover to protect you from some archers. What we essentially see here is the 3-action economy of Pathfinder 2nd Edition in Embryo. You get 3 actions and you have flexibility on how to use them. But we also see a problem that is perhaps not separable from the whole presentation of 4th Edition, in that it is very defined and is prone to the argument that it is very gamey. There's a number of rules and labels on things that, one, a new player would have to study and learn, but 2, arguably separates one from the fiction. You have to ask yourself, have I used my minor action this turn yet? To which I have to say, first of all, I was one of the people in the early 2010s who chose Pathfinder 1st Edition and basically chose the side of that war between Pathfinder 1st and D&D 4th Edition, and I kind of subscribe to that argument. But looking at this action system now, I feel like it kind of does the job in an efficient way, maybe not as easy for someone to jump into as compared to 5e, but avoids some of the hiccups that come up in 5e, which I'll get to next. Next, we move on to D&D 5th Edition, and I would say that the design goals were informed in large part by the reaction to 4th Edition. 4th Edition was criticized and not taken up by a lot of the community, who felt that it was too radical a departure from what had existed previously, and for other reasons. And one of the design goals of 5th Edition was to give nods to tradition and make it a greatest hits of the previous editions. So we see a number of things deliberately not defined and given to the GM to interpret in order to favor the style of play of rulings, not rules, that is often associated with the first editions of D&D. We saw also nods to 3rd edition crunch in giving players the ability to add abilities to their characters that give them definite increases in power. And we also saw things taken from 4th edition, most notably the recovery mechanics and short rests. Another design goal was to lower the barrier to entry for new players to play D&D. It appears that the designers concluded that 4th edition, one of its failings was that it had too many rules, that it codified too many things, and was too intimidating, that a new player would feel that they had to learn this whole manual in order to play their first game. So there was a decision to make fewer rules and to codify fewer things, and to assume a more experienced dungeon master who has played TTRPGs before to read the rules and to fill in the gaps and to shepherd new players into learning their first RPG. So how this translates for the action system that we're looking at is to get the action system out of the eyes of the players. Basically, it is to empower the DM to be able to tell a new player, tell me one thing you want to do on your turn, and I'll let you do it. That is your one action. That will be your attack or your spell that you're casting, or maybe use a magic item. Oh, and also you can move your speed. And we don't want to tell new players no if they have to take out a weapon in the middle of a city before making an attack, or to open a door in order to attack a monster behind the door. We'll just say that's part of your one free object interaction. So we have a system now where you have one action, moving up to your speed, having one free object interaction, and having one reaction, which was a deliberate scaling back of the multiple things you could do outside your turn in 4th edition. I will get to bonus actions a little later, but this meant a simplification, an easier on-ramp for new players. There were fewer things you could do on your turn, fewer things to think about, and to the extent you could do multiple things, each was in their own separate bucket. Arguably, it is simpler for players to not have to worry about different combinations of things that you can do. You just answer yes or no to this type of action, yes or no to the next type of action. And if you have nothing for the other types, that's nothing to think about. Also, as part of this design goal of lowering the barrier to entry is not having defined uses for your skills, which would be possibly intimidating to a new player. We don't have defined uses, for example, from 4th edition of how to use your medicine skill in combat, and codified ways on how to reduce your falling damage with your acrobatics skill, for example. Now it's up to every individual DM and also players to imagine ways to use these skills. So we see here the design goal of having fewer rules to give dungeon masters and players more freedom and possibilities of what they can do. Their limit is only their imagination and not constrained by any rules. Another design goal seems to be to speed up play, to give players fewer things to think about and do on their turn, particularly coming out of the experience of 4th edition, where one of the criticisms was that combat could get bogged down in too many abilities on one's turn and too many reactions to other people's turns. We see the meeting of all of these design goals while maintaining our historical commitment design goal to limiting people to one attack or spell or magic item per turn, going all the way back to the 1st editions. However, we'll see some tension between the design goals I've mentioned so far and those I'm about to go over, caused by the decision to be a bridge to players of all previous editions. We see that while they stripped things down to simplify things for newer players and to speed up play, they also wanted to give players the ability to do more things on their turn with bonus actions. Bonus actions in 5e adopt the exclusivity of swift actions from 3rd edition, exclusive in that you could not trade them for other kinds of actions, while using many of the defined minor actions from 4th edition. So we see a lot of those, what I call setup actions from 3rd edition and 4th edition, where you're enhancing your main attack routine or setting yourself up for future turns. They still don't want you to be forced to cast it this turn and wait until next turn to attack it. So those are now called bonus actions in 5th edition. These are abilities like Barbarian Rage, or Hunter's Mark for the Ranger, or Hex for the Warlock, or a spell like Divine Favor. And also spells that enhance your attacks on your turn, like Wrathful Smite. The idea of sustaining spells with one of your actions, meanwhile, doesn't require an action. It's folded into 5th edition's concentration mechanic, so they wanted to push that out of the way, remove something that you had to think about every turn. We also saw that the ability of 4th edition characters to heal and attack on the same turn is preserved with the Healing Word spell in 5th edition, which only costs your bonus action. You can still do a weapon attack or cast a cantrip while casting Healing Word. And also for 5e rogues, the term bonus action actually feels like its name. You get to do another action as long as it's on this specific list on your turn. So there seem to be a few design goals for having exclusive, non-exchangeable bonus actions. One of them is to limit the number of these bonus actions you can do. You are limited to 1. Also, it gives some characters the feeling that they are unique and can do something extraordinary that no one else can do, in the case of the rogue, which can do something no one else can do. And lastly, when you have multiple bonus actions that you can do, we see another instance of interesting decisions. You have to weigh various uses of that exclusive action. This action system, with actions and bonus actions being in 2 mutually exclusive buckets, serves some of these goals, but it also leads to frustration in play. As I said, the bonus action system borrows from 3rd edition swift actions in that you cannot trade them for other types. However, In 3rd edition, a lot of those things that were called swift actions, you kind of knew they were swift actions when you read them. They clearly were a companion to, a pertinent to your main action. They enhanced that main action's attack damage, or they gave a kind of Gish character or paladin a buff for the attacks that they wanted to start making on that same turn. But in 5th edition, we see a lot of mixed uses for these bonus actions. One whole category of minor actions in 4th edition that one did not expect to be swift actions in 3rd edition are the whole variety of things that enabled support classes to support their allies or heal somebody while still attacking on their turn. Things that were minor actions like a heal spell or giving inspiration to an ally. We see that Healing Word is a bonus action in 5e. Bardic Inspiration is a bonus action in 5e. In 4th edition, it was smooth. You had your healing ability, that was a minor action, and you could still do your Bardic Inspiration-like ability, that was also a minor action, both in the same turn. Another surprising bonus action is Spiritual Weapon, which gives you another attack as a bonus action, and on subsequent turns, you use your bonus action to make an attack. Divine Word, a big attack spell, is also a bonus action, and Misty Step feels like an escape hatch for casters. They get to use their bonus action to teleport away and move out of a martial enemy's reach and still be able to walk farther and cast a big spell. Having bonus actions defined that defy the old limitations of swift actions in 3rd edition means that we are now coming up with a lot of situations where you are just surprised that you can't do two things because they're both bonus actions. A bard that wants to heal their downed ally and give bardic inspiration to somebody else, these things are precluded because of how 5e's action economy works. And it's jarring because there's no conceivable reason for this in the fiction of the game. Minor actions just took less time than bigger actions, and you could do 2 minor actions. Now there's just no explanation for this incompatibility of these 2 actions. You're just told you can't. So players who want to have a effective turn that is optimal will actually need to list separately their actions and their bonus actions in separate columns. And I wouldn't be surprised, I don't have D&D Beyond, but D&D Beyond probably should do that as a result. And also trying to keep straight in your head which of those spells also require concentration. So there's a lot of meta juggling that feels purely mechanical and not really explained and not really lived in the fiction. And things become more gnarly for martial characters who rely on their bonus action to enhance their damage every round. So characters who rely on 2-weapon fighting or take feats like Polar Master that give them an extra attack with their bonus action, or monks. These characters are not able to cast spells like Hunter's Mark or Enter Rage while still doing their full attack, which had been possible in 3rd edition because it was a separate swift action that had nothing to do with your main attacks. This tension of competing goals leads to my least favorite rule in the action economy system, which is the rule that says if you cast a spell during your turn as a bonus action, you cannot cast another spell on your turn unless it is a cantrip that has a cost of 1 action. That is just confusing and unfortunate and sabotages a legitimate goal of making the game intuitive and easy for new players to learn and speeding up play. I'm a lawyer and even I still have trouble with that rule. It's an exception to an exception. Another consequence of this gamey meta is that clearly if you can find a way to fill your bonus action bucket when you build your character, then you are going to be a more optimal character than one who doesn't, while simultaneously not having too many bonus actions compete for that slot. Rogue may want to avoid spells that use their bonus action because it's going to compete directly with their cunning action ability. In a system designed to lower the barrier to entry, make it more intuitive, and to speed up play, yes, new players will feel just fine entering the game, but after a period of time will start to get frustrating moments with the system. And in addition, possibly be outshone by their fellow players who have learned to game the system. And it's important to consider what I opened this video with, that the bonus action system was never playtested. The last public playtest for D&D Next was September 19th, 2013. And in that document, you don't have bonus actions. The closest thing you have are swift actions. You have some spells that take a swift action to cast, and you have one swift action per turn. Significantly, the document says you can use your action to do a swift action. So there was exchangeability of the action types in this document. The Rogue's Cunning Action class feature did not give you the ability to use your swift action to dash, disengage, or hide. Rather, it let you have another action on your turn that must be one of those three things. Making an attack with a second weapon was also part of your action. So it was possible for a rogue to move in, make 2 attacks with their dual weapons, and disengage away, all in the same turn. Spiritual weapon cost an action to cast, and making it attack somebody else was just part of your action on the following round. Now, I'm not saying that this playtest document was better than what eventually came out. It wasn't, because you can see a problem here in what I've described. If you multiclassed, you could cast Spiritual Weapon in round 1, and then on round 2, make an attack with your 2 weapons, and with a Spiritual Weapon, and cast Healing Word all in the same turn, which they wanted to limit, and so therefore they made sure that all of these things had a action type that you could only have one of. However, what's not clear to me is why they wanted it to be not exchangeable with your action. As I said, removing the defined uses of most skills had the goal of giving DMs and players more freedom, but in practice, it also led to frustration and disagreements and arguments between DMs and players on what they could do with a particular skill, and also just a forgetting about skills because there weren't defined uses on how you could minimally use them, at least, with any given DM. Now that we've gone through that history, we can now go over the Pathfinder 2nd edition 3-action economy and consider whether it is a good fit for the next edition of Dungeons & Dragons. So what you have in Pathfinder 2e is you have 3 actions and 1 reaction. Some would even call this an action point system because some of the things you can do cost 2 or 3 actions. What's to prevent players from just attacking 3 times with a weapon or casting 3 spells? Well, it does a number of things. First, they actually do not give a hard limit on how many attacks or spells you can do on your turn. You can attack more than once on your turn, but every attack after the first is going to be less and less accurate. It's called a multiple attack penalty in Pathfinder. Your second attack will have a -5 penalty. Your third attack will have a -10 penalty. Also, at the same time, there's a number of things that you can do with your skills that don't have this penalty that you may want to do in lieu of a very inaccurate attack, such as using intimidation to demoralize an enemy and give them -1 to all their stats, or feint, use your deception or bluff skill to make them less able to defend against your very next attack. These things are available to everybody, and they also include ways to support your allies. The frightened effect that I described earlier lasts until the end of that enemy's next turn, so it's going to make all of your allies more able to hit it or make it fail a saving throw. Meanwhile, the vast majority of spells cost 2 actions to cast or more, and 1-action spells exist, but they're a small minority and they're substantially weaker. There are even some spells that let you decide how many actions you want to spend on them, such as Magic Missile, which fires a number of missiles depending on how many actions you spend on it. Meanwhile, some actions are so good, they might be coming from your class or a feat, that they want to limit how many times you can do it on a turn. And these actions often have the Flourish trait. You are limited to 1 action per turn that has this Flourish trait. So one example is Risky Reload. A gunslinger can reload their gun and fire it with 1 action. They cannot do that in the same turn that they also do Doctor's Visitation, which lets them run to an ally and battle medic them. Also, there is no concentration mechanic. Spells that the designers decided would require some effort to maintain must be sustained with one action every subsequent turn after you cast it. Under the system, it's possible to sustain more than one spell, but you have to spend more than one action per turn to sustain them. This 3-action system pursues these design goals. It lets you do more on your turn. It kind of sucks to have only one attack on your turn and then to miss it, which happens in other editions. This lets you do multiple attacks per turn. It doesn't hard limit how many attacks you can make on your turn. It discourages you with the multiple attack penalty. So there's some risk reward involved and interesting decisions to make. It also means more variety in your turns because you're not simply attacking on your turn. There are other things that you're incentivized to try out that don't suffer the multiple attack penalty. It benefits from being more intuitive. There are no types of actions to deal with, and they are all obviously exchangeable with each other because they're all the same. And there's a hidden bonus of this system. You can have actions that are decidedly better and more powerful at the cost of more actions to use them. So, and this is true for player characters and feats that they can learn and class abilities they can gain, and for monsters. So in a recent Pathfinder game I ran, there was a monster that had this scary area of effect spell that affected the entire party, but it required all 3 of its actions to do. And so the party was able to counter that by spreading out around it. It was a cone area effect because it could not move and re-aim it and use that effect because it used all of its actions in its turn. Another design goal is that it leads to more interesting, intense decision making because everything you could possibly do, all of your spells, all of your skills, are all competing for the same precious 3 actions. This is interesting when interacting with variable action spells. There's a video out there that says that Magic Missile, which lets you fire more missiles depending on how many actions you spend casting it, presents a false choice because, he argues, the optimal thing to do always is because you have a limited number of castings of the spell in a given day, is to spend 3 actions to fire the most number of missiles possible. But that's not true. It's situational. Sometimes you'll want to cast the 3-action version, yes, but other times you want to fire only 2 actions worth of missiles so that you can spend your last action to heal a downed ally who's next to you, which, by the way, the heal spell, if you spend only 1 action on it as opposed to more actions, is a touch spell. So you can do 2-action magic missile, 1-action heal. Or maybe there's a very scary enemy that only has 2 hit points and you want to knock them out. And that only requires 1 missile, leaving you 2 actions to cast Fireball on some other enemies. There are some disadvantages to the 3-action system, which I'll save for the next section when I talk about whether it makes sense for D&D. What prompted this video was me looking at the latest Unearthed Arcana, where to me, I discerned some pretty clear design goals. It looked like they wanted to empower players to have more defined ways to do more things, basically. So now there are defined ways of searching, studying, some other things I'm probably missing right now, but as a bonus action instead of an action, at the cost of a subclass feature or a feat. Bardic Inspiration no longer requires a bonus action to set up. You can just use it in response, in reaction to a check. 2-weapon fighting no longer costs you your bonus action. They're freeing up that bonus action by folding it into your main attack. And Hunter's Mark for the Ranger no longer requires concentration, allowing that Ranger to consider other spells that do require concentration. These together have the effect of pursuing these 3 design goals that I said near the beginning, giving people more things to do besides I attack. This is consistent with what we've seen in late 5th edition, such as Tasha's Guide to Everything, favoring more martials using the battle maneuvers of the Battle Master Fighter subclass. We also see more codification to help resolve arguments between DMs and players, and more defined uses of skills so that players are assured that their skills can do XYZ no matter who their DM is. Some of these actions that they defined are straight up borrowing from Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and I am all for stealing. Pathfinder 2nd Edition stole a lot of what it got from D&D 4th Edition, and of course, 1st Edition Pathfinder was just a revision of D&D 3rd Edition. But here the copying could have been done better, I think. Well, first of all, the jump action is smooshing together of Pathfinder's leap, long jump, and high jump all into one action. Study gives a defined way to learn about different monsters' abilities, just as the recall knowledge action does in Pathfinder. And we also see that when you change your movement type, such as walking to climbing, those require separate actions, just as Pathfinder has defined separate actions to climb, fly, burrow, and stride. But the problem with this copying is that while it made sense in Pathfinder's 3-action economy, it doesn't necessarily make sense in D&D's 1-action economy, where doing one of these things means you forego your attack, spell, or magic item. So you cannot run and jump over a chasm and attack. You cannot study an enemy and then attack that enemy. You cannot do the first thing in this document. And to be able to do the latter, you need to take the Keen Mind feat. And this just feels like attacks. This means that being able to do other things on your turn besides attack is reserved to those who make their build around it. Now, does it make sense for D&D to adopt the 3-action economy? Well, my conclusion is I don't think so, and I'm not completely sure of my answer. First, it's a radical departure from the action economy system of 5e. And there's a reason Wizards of the Coast is saying this is not a new edition. They want to assure people that not much will change, and 5e is a very successful edition. It has sold more than any previous edition, and for economic reasons, it makes sense not to completely eliminate the belief that this will be compatible with 5e. It would be risky, but I'd be lying if I didn't say that the majority of players coming from 5e and Pathfinder 1st Edition really enjoy the 3-action economy and kind of wish other systems adopted it. Again, I didn't initially plan to make this video, but the recent UA made me wonder whether this is something that, one, the designers and the player base actually want to move toward. And I don't know what D&D players as a whole, I can't claim to know what they want. And so I'd love to see comments in the below to that effect. Another problem is that D&D wants to maintain a distinction from Pathfinder 2e. It needs what is called in microeconomics product differentiation. You want to be able to say, I am this, unlike that other competitor. And they want to continue to be able to say, we are the game you play first, because it is simpler in a number of ways and doesn't have those things the other system does. And adopting the 3-action economy may, in the public eye, sound a lot like they are actually endorsing a lot of the things that Pathfinder 2e has done. So that could be a reason too. And now I'll just go over the disadvantages of the 3-action economy system, which are further reasons not to adopt it. One is that it is less simple to newcomers. The multiple attack penalty is something that you have to account for. You have to write 3 different bonuses on your character sheet, and it means you're not always adding the same number to every attack. Now, there are players who never remember their attack bonus, so actually it may not be more difficult because they never remember their bonus. But for other players, it will add some more unwanted math at the table. And there are weapons also that are called agile weapons that reduce that multiple attack penalty to a -4 and -8. Also having traits attached to actions such as the flourish trait in order to avoid unwanted combinations. adds more complexity. Also, having more actions on your turn and having more possible combinations of what you can do on your turn will, for certain players, lead to more analysis paralysis, more time spent on their turn, and make turns last longer. If a table is not having issues with the rules for actions and bonus actions and concentration and juggling what you can do on your turn, then this will just straight up lead to more time spent on your turn. And finally, it necessitates a lot of redesign of player character abilities and monster abilities. So is there an alternative? Well, I think that there is. And this journey we've gone through the history of D&D and the different design goals that could be met, makes me gravitate towards 4th edition's system and a modified version of 4th edition's system, which I think can accommodate how 5e classes and abilities are written using bonus actions and actions if we make some tweaks to it. First, you will have 1 main action on your turn and 2 minor actions. Now, one of the people on my Discord recommended calling it major actions, but I don't know. I think my gut tells me main action is an easier distinction to make because the word is more different. Current bonus actions and moving your speed are now minor actions. And I'll show the chart of actions in 4th edition, which I think could be used, except that what are called move actions would be minor actions. You can always use your main action to do a minor action. So you can do 3 minor actions on your turn if you wish. This does mean toning down how much speed you get per move. This was a lesson from the Pathfinder 2e playtest where characters have the ability to move 3 times, 30 feet each time, often extended the entire width of a battle map. They decided they needed to tone that down, the default speed to 25 feet. Doing more than 1 speed type on your turn, each of them is a minor action. You can use 1 minor action to walk up to a ladder and your second to climb it. And then your main action to attack the enemy that is at the top of the ladder. Meanwhile, many spells will cost you your main action, and there'll be a limit of 1 spell per turn. Hard stop. Casters could use a nerf, and we don't have that confusing rule. And I am not so sure about this, but it's something to be experimented with or play tested, but to replace the concentration mechanic and having a hard limit of 1 concentration spell at a time to having it cost 1 minor action every following turn to sustain the spell. It would be less limiting than having a limit of 1, but also give an interesting cost by costing you your actions, well, minor actions on following turns. It might possibly be busted by allowing 1 caster to have 2 concentration spells under the current system, but if we're revising spells, which I like the spell guidance, and nerfing some more broken spells, maybe the new spells will be compatible with this suggestion. So under this proposed system, you can move, jump over a chasm, and attack, or cast a spell, a melee spell, to the monster on the other side of the chasm. Or you can move twice and then swing your sword, or you can move 3 times. And now you get to avoid the no 2 bonus actions rule. You can do 2 things that normally were impossible before. Also, as part of this system, you would need simple, compelling bonus actions that everyone can do that maybe can utilize your skills so that you're doing other things besides attacking or casting a spell, such as study, search, some of the actions we're seeing defined in this UA document. Also, there are some actions that can be borrowed from Pathfinder 2e. So, for example, demoralizing an enemy, intimidating them to give them -1 to all of their statistics for a round, or feinting, using a deception skill check to get a bonus to your next attack against them. There is a disadvantage to this proposal in that it gives more things you can possibly do, more combinations for players who want to kind of not think through all of the possibilities of their turn, or be paralyzed by the same possibilities. And so there'll be some simple minor actions that I think could be designed here. For example, a minor action to give +1 to your attacks on that turn. And if you use that same minor action twice, it gives you +2 on your attacks on that turn, making it so that if you are standing in place attacking, you're actually slightly more effective than with your attacks than had you walked up to them. An alternative is to increase your defenses, your armor class, and your saving throws by the same number with the cost of 1 minor action. And that DM who's facing a brand new player who's only learning which die is which, you can just simply say to that player, you do one thing on your turn and you can probably do it. Oh, and also tell me if you're in offensive or defensive stance. Finally, regardless of what action system 6e eventually adopts, I think there are some things that cost your bonus action in 5e now that are not minor and are not simply enhancing or prepping your main attack. Things like spiritual weapon or misty step that I think need to be reassigned something else. So those are my thoughts on the history of D&D action systems and on whether 6e should adopt Pathfinder's system. I would love to see your thoughts. I hope that this video stirs discussion and gets more gears turning in people's heads of the horizons and possibilities that are there for this new edition of Dungeons and Dragons, and also move the discussion beyond gut reacting to this or that specific change toward what are the design goals that we want in this edition. So that's it. If you like the video, please like. I'm going to have future videos critiquing future releases about One D&D, and also I have a lot of great videos on my channel about Pathfinder 2e if you want to check that out too. And if you haven't yet, please support my Patreon. I am a lawyer, but I don't get money from law. I am an activist lawyer, and my income comes from the Patreon and GMing Pathfinder and RPGs. And join the Discord community. There's a great community there. So that's it. I am Ronald, the rules lawyer, and I'll see you next time.